The world of drug trafficking is shrouded in secrecy. Few names loom as large as Boston George. George Jung, a man who went from small-town beginnings to become a drug kingpin. He was a pivotal player in the cocaine trade of the 1970s and 80s. His story is a cautionary tale. It's about ambition, greed, and the seductive power of the underworld. George Jacob Jung was born in 1942 in Weymouth, Massachusetts. He grew up in a typical middle-class family but craved more. He sought excitement, adventure, and wealth. He found it all, albeit illegally, in the world of drug smuggling. Jung's journey into the criminal underworld began with marijuana. He quickly realized the potential for greater profits with cocaine. Jung's story isn't just about drugs. It's about the American dream gone wrong. His ambition drove him to the top of a criminal empire, but also led to his downfall. He was a complex figure, capable of charm and ruthlessness. He rose to dizzying heights, only to crash back down. He left behind a legacy as captivating as it was controversial. His story continues to fascinate as a reminder of the allure and cost of a life outside the law. George Jung's early life was ordinary, but he yearned for more. The 1960s counterculture movement drew him in. He saw it as a path to liberation from his small-town life. His first foray into drugs was with marijuana. He quickly recognized the potential for profit. In 1967, Jung headed to California. He enrolled at the University of Southern Mississippi but aimed to make his fortune in the drug trade. He started small, selling marijuana to fellow students. His ambition grew with each successful deal. He was determined to make his mark. California in the late 1960s was a hotbed of counterculture. Jung embraced the lifestyle, befriending surfers and dropping out of college. He started dealing marijuana more seriously. He convinced a stewardess friend to smuggle marijuana on flights. His network expanded and his profits soared. He believed he was untouchable. He reveled in the thrill of the illicit, but the stakes were about to get much higher. Upon release, Jung and later traveled to Colombia. They connected with powerful figures in the drug trade. Jung took charge of the smuggling operation. They utilized small private airstrips. The cocaine trade was far more lucrative than marijuana. Their success emboldened them, but their operation did not go unnoticed. The DEA was determined to dismantle the cocaine trade. Jung thrived in the chaotic world of the Colombian cocaine trade. He earned the respect of his associates. He embraced the persona of Boston George. He cultivated an image of invincibility. But beneath the surface, paranoia grew. He knew the DEA was closing in. He had escaped capture several times, but the pressure was mounting. Jung's smuggling operation grew sophisticated. He purchased a fleet of old DC-3 airplanes. He modified them for low-altitude flights. He established clandestine landing strips. His operation became a well-oiled machine, but his hubris would be his downfall. Jung sought refuge in the Bahamas. He purchased a sprawling estate. He hosted extravagant parties. But the DEA was tracking his movements. In 1975, they raided his estate. They seized a massive cache of cocaine. Jung barely escaped. His paradise was lost.
George Jung was sentenced to 60 years in federal prison. The sentence, one of the harshest ever handed down for drug trafficking at the time, was a stark reminder of the severity of his crimes and the government's determination to crack down on the cocaine trade. The man who had once lived a life of luxury and excess, who had amassed a fortune from his illicit activities, was now facing decades behind bars. The fall from grace was swift and brutal. Gone were the lavish parties, the beautiful women, and the trappings of wealth. In their place were the cold, harsh realities of prison life. The man who had once commanded a vast network of smugglers and associates, including notorious figures like Carlos Later and Pablo Escobar, was now just another inmate, stripped of his freedom and his identity. Prison life was a far cry from the world Jung was accustomed to. Gone were the days of fast cars, extravagant spending, and the constant pursuit of pleasure. He was now subject to the rigid routines and strict regulations of prison life, his every move monitored, his freedom curtailed. He spent his days working menial jobs within the prison, a stark contrast to the life he had once lived. His nights were spent in a cramped cell, the weight of his sentence bearing down on him. He was surrounded by other men who had made similar choices, men whose lives had been consumed by the allure of easy money and the allure of the drug trade. The news of his sentence sent shockwaves through Jung's family. His parents, who had always held out hope that their son would find a different path, were devastated. His daughter, Christina Sunshine Jung, whom he had rarely seen during his years as a fugitive and a prisoner, was just a child. She would grow up knowing her father only through prison visits and the stories that swirled around his infamous legacy. In prison, stripped of his wealth and his freedom, George Jung was forced to confront the consequences of his actions. He had ample time to reflect on the choices he had made, the people he had hurt, and the life he had thrown away. He began to understand the true cost of his ambition, the devastating impact his actions had had on his family and on countless others whose lives had been touched by addiction. He realized that the allure of easy money, the thrill of the chase, and the intoxicating power he had wielded had come at a terrible price. He had traded his freedom, his family, and his integrity for a fleeting taste of wealth and notoriety. And now, confined to a cell, he was left to grapple with the wreckage of his past. His story, once a cautionary tale of ambition and excess, now took on a new dimension. It became a story of redemption, of a man seeking forgiveness and attempting to make amends for his past. He began to correspond with his daughter, hoping to build a relationship with her, despite the barriers that separated them. He used his platform, albeit limited, to speak out against the dangers of drug use and the devastating impact of the drug trade.
Prison life was a harsh reality check for Boston George. Gone were the days of private jets, extravagant parties, and endless supplies of cocaine. He was now inmate number 11227-025, a number in the federal prison system. He was stripped of his freedom, his wealth, and his identity. The early years were the toughest. The weight of his 60-year sentence pressed down on him. He missed his daughter Christina terribly. He had missed so much of her life already. He grappled with the guilt of his crimes, the knowledge that his actions had caused so much pain and suffering. He filled his days with routine. He worked in the prison library, surrounding himself with books, seeking solace in their pages. He wrote letters, pouring out his thoughts and regrets to his family and friends. He clung to the hope of one day being reunited with his daughter, of seeking redemption for his past. The man who once thrived on excitement and risk found himself craving normalcy. He longed for simple pleasures, a walk in the fresh air, a conversation with his daughter, a life free from the confines of prison walls. As the years turned into decades, George Jung had ample time for introspection. He reflected on his life, the choices he had made, the paths he could have taken. He thought about the people he had hurt, the lives he had damaged through his involvement in the drug trade. He regretted the pain he had caused his parents, who had always stood by him, even in his darkest moments. He regretted the lost years with his daughter, the milestones he had missed, the bond they could have had. Most of all, he regretted the damage his actions had inflicted on countless individuals and families torn apart by addiction. He recognized the seductive power of the drug trade, the allure of easy money, the intoxicating feeling of power and invincibility. But he also saw the devastating consequences, the addiction, the violence, the broken lives left in its wake. He wished he could go back, make different choices, choose a different path. But the past was unchangeable. All he could do now was try to make amends, to use his story as a cautionary tale, and to hope that others might learn from his mistakes.
In 2014, after nearly 2 decades behind bars, George Jung was granted an early release. His sentence, initially considered insurmountable, had been reduced due to changes in drug sentencing guidelines and his good behavior in prison. He emerged from prison a changed man. Gone was the swagger and bravado of Boston George. He was older, thinner, his face etched with the hardships of prison life. But there was also a sense of relief, of gratitude for a second chance. He was determined to make the most of his newfound freedom. He wanted to reconnect with his daughter, to build a relationship with her, to make up for lost time. He wanted to share his story, to warn young people about the dangers of drugs and the allure of the fast life. His release was met with mixed reactions. Some saw him as a reformed criminal, a man who had paid his debt to society and deserved a chance at redemption. Others viewed him as a symbol of a bygone era, a reminder of the devastating toll of the drug trade.